we have 6 new members so far this year. Now, the record, as far as our records go back, is 34 in 1 year. We had a great year last year. We had 33 new members. But the record of 34 was in years that ended in 5 or 0. So this year has got to be an even bigger year. I think, let me tell you who our new members are. I'll just, Elaine Louie from the New York Times. Elaine, are you here? No. David Corcoran, a former editor of Science Times, the weekly science section of the New York Times. Sherry Henry, who I know is here because I'm lucky enough to be sitting next to her. Sherry, stand up. She was, of course, on the radio for a long, long time and is the author of The Deep Divide, a study of women's attitudes toward feminism. I think that's something we're fairly forward about, especially considering the median age of this crowd. As you may know, Sherry, one of our recent honorees was Gloria Steinem, although my mother at 99 didn't think she was militant enough. Anyway, Charles de la Fuente, who was also at the New York Times for a long time. Tom Watkins, who I used to work with at CNN and haven't yet had a chance to say hello. Over at this table, Tom, stand up, along with Bethany Candell, who is related to Myron Candell. Very talented journalist in her own right, and Tom was in the medical unit and a news editor at CNN. Anyway, I hope you'll welcome them both. And now, unfortunately, I would like to have a moment of silence because we lost 3 of our very faithful members and a good friend of the Silurians. First, Timothy Lee, who was a longtime Silurian who worked for the New York Post and CBS before becoming a public relations man. Mort Gordon, a former reporter and editor at Fairchild Publications. And for those of you who were at the Lifetime Achievement Awards dinner and our honoree couldn't make it, he was in Lenox Hill Hospital, unfortunately. Sandy Sokolow of CBS also did not make it. Now, for those of you who were at the dinner, you may remember that the longtime friend of the Silurians and of Sokolow I'm referring to is Bob Simon. And now I'm doubly sorry that Bob was going to be the surprise speaker at my request for Sandy, but when Sandy was in the hospital and could not make it, Bob thought it would be too irreverent to do a friar's roast of Sokolow without Sandy being in the room. So he just said was very warm with everybody, but didn't speak. I'm sorry I didn't put him on tape. Anyway, we miss them all, and I'd like to have a moment of silence for them. Thank you. Now, I was just going to introduce our speaker by saying Liz Smith. But because, you know, the Pope, the President, Hank Aaron, what are you going to say? But one of our dear mutual friends who I had hoped would be here, Karen Burns, who was a great reporter at ABC and CBS, and was going to come but is not feeling so hot herself, emailed me at 12:49 a.m. And she said this: Liz is incapable of saying an unkind word unless you get her into a political discussion or bring an injustice to her attention. Now remember, Karen's a pretty good writer. This Texas farm girl has been passionate about equal and civil rights all her life, gutsy and not afraid to tell the truth. I could keep going, but I'm just going to say she's adventurous in every sense of the word. The thing that makes her the truly superb reporter she's known to be is her intense, deep, and real fascination with people of all ages and backgrounds. This is all caps. It took me a long time to learn when you email somebody and you've accidentally hit the all caps key, it means you're mad. I didn't know that. Did you? I think Karen is just trying to emphasize something. She says she listens, that's in caps, and remembers, that's in caps, and loves, and that's in caps, meeting new people. Trust, all caps, a mandatory component for any good reporter. Just ask Brian Williams. No, Karen didn't write that line. I did. I don't know one person who does not trust Liz. She's intimate friends with many, many of the world's most famous talents, stars, yet she never forgets the little people, even little kids. What else do I need to say about Liz Smith? Nothing, I think, except please come up. And her old pals, Warren Hogan, Walter Anderson, are going to bring her up here, and she's going to let it rip. We're so happy you're here, Liz.
About half of what you said was true. I used to be Liz Smith. And I see to my happiness that you are all what we call players. And that's refreshing. Everybody here, those I knew and don't know, are impressive to me. You're even though I'm older than most of you, you're my idols. So I guess all of us in a gathering like this are players, and we remember our past glories. They're beginning to seem downright quaint. Or we're forging ahead. I had this prop. Time magazine with the cover story this week. It's has a line, "This baby could live to be 142 years old." The frontiers of longevity, as Time calls them, seem like a dangerous place to me, considering how good or bad one might feel when growing so much older. And then there's the weather and today's usual headlines of doom. But who, being 70, 80, or 90, elects to live quite so long? I guess I still do, considering the alternative. Anyway, that doesn't bear worrying about, because unless you have a religious belief that there'll be something wonderful in the hereafter, I found it perfectly wonderful right here. I wrote in my daily column, which I still toss around for the Huffington Post, in the New York Social Diary, I wrote about coming here to speak to you, and I wrote then that I was born just exactly 1 year before the Solarians were themselves born. And then I thought, with so much wisdom, I could merely congratulate you for surviving the internet age and sit down. But I'm supposed to be kind of amusing. Here. The internet age, who would have thunk it? I guess people were saying the same thing about those horses rearing up in the streets when they encountered the Model T Ford. And that wasn't too long after I was already a kid. You know, once upon a time in the world we live in, work in, a byline really meant something. I don't think it means much anymore. It used to mean a lot of money in the old days for Walter Winchell. Luella Parsons, Hedda Hopper, Earl Wilson, Lee Mortimer. Does anybody remember these names? Dan Walker, Bob Sylvester, and the astounding Dorothy Kilgallen, who was a really good reporter. And then there was Ed Sullivan. He just added to his fortune by becoming a TV presenter of what was essentially left over by vaudeville and burlesque. That turned into television. So the fact that bylines don't mean much anymore because everybody who uses the internet can have a byline. They can express their thoughts, repeat gossip, attack people, praise people, and do what some of us used to be well paid for, doing it exclusively. Now, exclusivity is a journalism joke. There are a few exceptions, of course, and I would be derelict not to mention this very week my friend David Carr, who was simply the greatest. And I'll tell you how he was bothered to be great personally to me. Whatever I do understand about using the internet, I understand from talking to David Carr and having a lot of delicious lunches where I hadn't a clue when he explained how things were working. He was determined, though, that all of us should get in with it and carry on and overcome our various ills, just as he had done. And he was a superstar in making himself, he made himself into an exception, both in dropping and having suffered a serious, severe drug addiction, and in thinking ahead. And this brings us around to gossip today. You know, I never thought of myself as a very good gossip. I was always more of a sort of starstruck observer, bystander. I became eventually a philosopher of celebrity. And anyway, who needs a gossip columnist these days? Everybody is a gossip columnist. The internet is simply boils with gossip. Hate statements, love statements, speculation, and anybody can say practically anything without worrying too much about getting fired or going to jail. And looking back, I realize I've had about 65 years of working, observing this wonderful life in New York. And I wouldn't take anything for those glory days. I arrived in New York in 1949, and remember there'd been a little thing like World War II. It had only been over for a few years. So I was a young World War II bride, recently divorced, and New York had been reviving itself for several years after they turned the lights back on. And this reminds me of G.K. Chesterton, who, coming to Times Square, said, "What a garden of delight this would be if one couldn't read." And I think about that guy every time I go anywhere near Times Square. You know, shows, I was just a terrible hick, but shows like South Pacific and Kiss Me Kate were on Broadway, and you could go to the theater for about $2.50. But then America still had to go through, after World War II, multiple wars that came after. The Korean, the Vietnam, the Falklands exercise, the Panamanian invasion, Cuba, the Cold War, the Gulf War, then the Iraqi War, the problems with Iran, Syria, Libya, and now ISIS in the Middle East, where we seem to have lost our way. We can't decide, even the president, what the ISIS people are all about without seeming politically incorrect. The last time I spoke here to the players, it was about 2006. And there was a new documentary out then. I forget its name. But it was discussing the old military-industrial complex that President Eisenhower had warned us against. It seems we can no more disengage from making weapons of war than from using them. It's like trying to convince people not to be celebrity crazy about people who don't really matter. In both instances, it seems to me we can't disengage from either war or gossip. And the old documentary I've mentioned says if we gave up using all those weapons we so diligently prepare, then the economies of the world would probably collapse. And the makers of the documentary, even long ago, claimed that Congress is a willing participant in this duet, making it a trio. The House and Senate simply seldom turn down the Pentagon. So we'll see in the days ahead. Will we really go to destroy ISIS to help solve the many problems that we seem to have made ourselves? And how often we change our minds about whatever we decide to do. I happened to be living in Alamogordo, New Mexico, when the first atom bomb was experimentally exploded there, only 90 miles away in the desert. And about 3 months later, after Hiroshima, I thought that was a great solution, that this horrible invention had happened. And it meant that all those guys training for the invasion of Japan wouldn't have to go and be killed. But every blessing carries its own curse. And now all of us live under the threat of nuclear world destruction, however you pronounce it. So it doesn't seem that even the internet and free speech and seriously being overly politically correct has gotten us very far. When I used to run into President Clinton around New York, he would always say the exact same thing. Liz, got any good gossip? Well, I was busy every day making a living, putting the best of what I could learn or steal from somebody else or overhear into my columns. And I stand here as a person who has had the good fortune to work for 5 different newspapers in New York City. The News, Newsday, the Journal American, the New York Post, and the Staten Island Advance, because Staten Island insisted that it was a separate entity and it could make a separate contract with me because I was special to Staten Island and the rest of New York didn't matter. Now, that has all ended, and gossip seems more or less extraneous. I don't believe half of what I hear because I don't see the bylines. I can trust. Everybody is a gossip, and celebrity has become kind of a nationwide fad. And it's usually some kind of celebrity that we middle-aged folks don't even recognize. It's the celebrity of non-accomplishment. There are a few big stars, especially in the music world, but the rest of it is starting to seem to me like make-believe. People have always looked up to their betters or what passes for them, and there have been real stars with real glamour. And Alan J. Lerner put this best when he wrote the song for Camelot, I Wonder What the King is Doing Tonight. We all wonder what those people are doing. And we don't have enough kings, real stars, and real leaders. And the movie-making business, which so many of us depended on for whatever little culture we have, has exploded. It ruined the monopoly of studio power, I think. And hundreds of creative people made a lot of very good movies this year with very little money. But it's hard for me to find out where to go to see these things. I'm always reading a rave about something that just finished. It seems to me they used to tell us where it was, give the address, and tell you how long it was going to last. So the only celebrities making really big money are in music, or what passes for it. rock and roll has graduated to whatever excess it's going to. And then all of a sudden, fashion is a big deal. It's not just the belonging to the rich and the 1%. I believe it's the number 2 business in New York. So mix fashion with weird music, and I guess you get something new and important and deafening. The other explosion is in the mysteries to me of modern art. If I had just kept those old Andy Warhols. Andy used to say to me when I would write something for an interview, I can't pay you, Liz. Just go to the studio and take home anything you want. But I was a snob. And with half the world starving to death, and parts of show business trying to solve this problem, we want to say more power to these celebrities who take matters in their own hands. But the other great fad going on now is food. You read about food everywhere, whether it's like it was just invented. Unusual food with strange names, how to make it look good enough to eat. I find this whole section of the Times given over to food. So I guess we have a lot of big rowdy music, a lot of activity in modern art and food. I must be leaving somebody out. President Clinton told me at the Texas Book Festival some years ago, he had gone there at the suggestion of Laura Bush. Yes, Laura Bush. He said there were 3 things that have happened of consequence in the new 21st century. First, statistics show that now, for the first time ever, 50% of the world's nations are democracies. 2, he pointed out, that the rise of the internet, the web, whatever you want to call it, the surprising new technologies can do what government can no longer do. And he cited people like Bill Gates and Bono. He cited volunteerism, fundraising privately against illness, and the worldwide fight against AIDS and to save the environment and help tsunami victims or earthquake victims in Pakistan or Haiti. There are hundreds of groups going where government can't go, passing the hat, trying to solve the problems in cases like New Orleans, where the government has disappointed us. And he noted that how many millions of us are willing to take up these fights. This was very appealing, encouraging to me. It made me feel better in the welter and midst of our troubles, foreign and domestic, and all of the things that Mother Nature has visited us of late. And it just cheered me up for a minute. But the 21st century hasn't turned out to be quite so rosy as President Clinton predicted. And when it comes to spreading democracy, I'm not sure the despotic world is ready for it. Every revolution for freedom, freedom of speech, all of that, turns back into a dictatorship, like in Egypt. People want law and order, I think, more than anything. And the good thing may be that new technologies are coming at us now like bullets. I was watching the editor-in-chief of The Economist talk to Charlie Rose recently. She's unusual in that she's a woman. Zanny Minton Beddoes. She said, technology is changing so fast and is so far ahead of our imaginations that it's solving problems we can only dream of. And she insists that technology is the energy behind the internet revolution. It is just beginning. She sounded like a really smart woman to me. I hope technology is going to solve our problems. Otherwise, we're going to go to Mars and not have any way to get back in one lifetime. We're not acting fast enough on global warming, and we're downright afraid to really go back to the Middle East because everything we do there makes it seem worse. I guess mankind has always lived in one dilemma or another. I'm cheered to know, just for one example, that technology has come up with an entirely new, thinnest material imaginable. It's something called graphene. And the New Yorker wrote all about graphene. It was invented by Andre Gein, G-E-I-N, and it's practically like finding a new element, an element for building and not adding to the mass. It's so thin you can't see it. So they haven't figured out what to do with it yet. You know, if I seem a little hesitant today, it's because I'm on drugs. Otherwise, I don't think I would have been able to speak. But you made me very happy to have invited me here today. There's no group I can think of that I admire and long to exceed my expectations with, to admire what you have done. I know. I think you're the finest people in America, but I'm on drugs, remember. They are just moderate drugs, but it's fun to come here today and not have a bad thought. You are all going to help journalism survive and improve, because that's what good, smart people do. You guard us from ourselves. even if it means we have to start speaking in tongues. I hope I live long enough to be invited back when I'm not taking drugs, because I know I could make a better speech. And I just saw one little cartoon today. I read that Kim Kardashian, because we can't meet without saying her name, she has brought out some kind of new app, and it's already earned $50 million in profits. And you and I are wondering why we didn't save more money for our retirements. Hey, I know I rambled around a lot today. I was just taking advantage of your generosity in having asked me. I've always thought I was sort of tagging along after you guys, picking up the pieces. And that's been the best career I could have possibly thought of. Thank you. God bless you.